She called it forbidden. I called it undeniable. Somewhere between rules and quiet nights, our hearts began to whisper the same truth. The art studio was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that felt alive, like the air itself was waiting for something. A single desk lamp cast a warm pool of light over the scattered sketches on my table, its glow stretching across the old wooden floor. Outside, the campus had already emptied. Distant echoes of footsteps faded long ago, leaving only the hum of the heater and the faint, lingering scent of turpentine and charcoal dust. I stayed behind to finish a piece that had been nagging at me all week, lines that refused to find their shape, shadows that kept slipping away. My brush hesitated over the canvas, and that's when I heard the soft click of the studio door. She stepped in, her presence subtle yet impossible to miss. Ms. Hale, 42, confident in that effortless way that doesn't ask for attention but earns it anyway. Her dark hair was loosely tied back, a few strands escaping to frame her face, and her scarf, wine red, fell over her shoulder like an unfinished stroke of paint. "Still here?" she asked, her voice calm, carrying the kind of patience that made you want to listen. I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Just couldn't leave it like this." She walked closer, heels barely making a sound against the worn floor, and stopped beside me. For a moment, she didn't speak, just looked. Her fingers brushed the edge of the canvas, light and precise, the way you'd turn the fragile page of an old book. "You've got persistence," she murmured, almost to herself. "Most would have given up after dark." I caught a trace of her perfume, something soft, like jasmine after rain, and felt a strange tightness in my chest. She wasn't like the other instructors. There was no rush in her, no hurried advice thrown over her shoulder. When she was here, she was really here. Her gaze shifted from the painting to me. "Tell me what's missing," she said. The question caught me off guard. I was used to being told what was wrong, not being asked. I explained, too quickly, how the lines fell off, how the figure wasn't breathing the way I wanted it to. She listened without interrupting, her arms folding loosely as she leaned against the edge of the table. "Sometimes it's not the drawing," she said softly. "Sometimes it's you. You're carrying something in your head that won't let the work breathe." Her words landed heavier than I expected. She had a way of seeing past the canvas, as if the art was just a doorway. A long pause stretched between us. The studio felt smaller now, the air warmer where she stood close. My brush slipped slightly in my fingers, and I cleared my throat. "I guess I just didn't want to leave it unfinished," I said. She smiled, not the kind you give out of politeness, but a small, knowing one that softened her face. "That's a good reason to stay," she whispered. And just like that, the room felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just more awake. Rain had started to fall not long after sunset, a steady rhythm against the tall studio windows. The usual chatter of the art building was gone. The hallways had emptied, leaving only the low hum of the radiators and the soft patter of water on glass. I was still there, hunched over a table with smudged charcoal on my fingers, chasing the shape of a shadow that refused to stay put. The door creaked again, and there she was, Ms. Hale. She carried a thermos in one hand and a stack of ungraded sketches in the other. Her hair was slightly damp, darkened at the ends, a few stray drops clinging to the loose scarf around her neck. She paused in the doorway, watching me for a moment the way someone watches a candle burn lower than it should. "You again," she said, with a faint lift in her voice. "You do realize it's Friday night?" I gave a small shrug, half smiling. "Some people go out." I draw. She set her things down on the side table and unscrewed the thermos. The smell of chamomile drifted between us, calm, earthy, grounding. "At least let me offer you some tea," she said, pouring it into a paper cup. "This storm will keep you here longer than you think." I accepted it, fingers brushing hers for a fraction of a second as she handed it over. The warmth traveled faster than the tea itself, something small but startlingly vivid. She moved behind me, her shadow falling across the paper I was working on. "You're pushing too hard on the lines," she murmured. "The rain will do half the work for you tonight, use it." I turned slightly curious. Use the rain? Her eyes flicked to mine, steady and deliberate. Yes. Let it slow you down. You're trying to finish, not to feel. That silence returned again, not awkward but full, like the kind you share with someone you're not supposed to stay too close to, and yet you do. After a while, she sat at the table beside me, spreading the sketches she had brought. Her presence was quiet but undeniable, like a melody that settles in the room without asking for attention. She sipped her tea, and I watched a droplet of rain trace the curve of the window behind her, as though it too hesitated before falling. You know, she said at last, this is the part where I'm supposed to remind you, don't stay too late, don't blur the lines. Her tone wasn't scolding. If anything, it was soft, protective. But there was something behind it, a flicker in her gaze as she set her cup down. I nodded. I get it. Rules. Yes. Rules, she echoed. Then her fingers rested briefly on the sketch between us, smoothing a crease that wasn't really there. But art doesn't care about rules, does it? The rain outside deepened, a slow drumbeat against the world, and for a moment neither of us moved. It wasn't much, just a cup of tea, a shared silence, her shoulder barely a breath away from mine. But the boundary had been spoken now, and it was already starting to tremble. The library was nearly empty that night, a rare hush blanketing the wide hallways. The overhead lights were dimmed, leaving just the golden pools of the desk lamps along the far tables. It was the kind of quiet that almost felt like a choice, like the building itself wanted to rest. I had tucked myself away in a corner booth, sketchbook open, notes scattered around me. I wasn't working on an assignment anymore. I was sketching faces from memory, hers among them, if I was being honest. I traced the lines of her expression without really meaning to, the curve of her lips when she was thinking, the way her eyes seemed to settle on something deeper than the surface. Late again, came a familiar voice, soft enough to not disturb the room. I looked up, and there she was, Ms. Hale, a folder under her arm, her coat half-buttoned as if she hadn't planned to stay long. Her hair was slightly tousled from the wind outside, and there was a faint flush on her cheeks from the cold. I could say the same, I replied. She smiled faintly, the kind that tilts only one corner of the mouth. I had papers to grade. And maybe I didn't want to go home yet. Something about the way she said it was different, less guarded, more real. She set her folder down and slid into the seat across from me. The table was narrow, our knees were close enough that I was aware of every inch between us. What are you working on? She asked, glancing at my sketchbook. I hesitated for a moment before turning it toward her. She studied the rough lines, her finger hovering just above the page without touching it. You draw people the way you think of them, she murmured. Not the way they are, but the way they sit in your mind. Is that a good thing? I asked. It's an honest thing. There was a pause, longer than it should have been. She leaned back, her gaze drifting to the window beside us. Beyond the glass, the quad was empty, lit only by the pale wash of a street lamp. I used to stay late like this, she said suddenly. Back when I was in your shoes. It felt easier than going home to a quiet apartment. Art was loud enough to drown out the silence. Her voice softened, and for the first time, I caught a glimpse of something behind her composed exterior, a loneliness she didn't wear openly, but carried nonetheless. I didn't know what to say at first, so I just listened. When I reached for my pencil, my hand brushed against hers on the table. It wasn't intentional. It was light, fleeting, but she didn't pull away. Not right away. Her fingers shifted, as if deciding whether to stay or retreat. Finally, she cleared her throat gently. You should get some rest soon, she said. But her eyes lingered on mine for a heartbeat longer than the words required. The classroom was supposed to be empty by now. The clock above the whiteboard ticked past 9, the corridors outside already darkened for the night. The faint scent of chalk lingered in the air, mixing with the cool metallic tang of rain-soaked air sneaking in from a half-open window. I was packing up my sketchbook when the door opened. Ms. Hale stepped in, her heels clicking softly against the floor, a stack of papers in one hand. Her hair was still damp from the weather, pulled into a loose twist that had begun to come undone. "You're here late again," she said, though her voice didn't carry the weight of reproach, only weariness, and something quieter beneath it. "I guess I've made a habit of it," I replied, offering a small smile. "You too." She set the papers down on the nearest desk and leaned lightly against it, folding her arms. "I came back for a file I left behind, and to see if you'd left the lights on again." I caught the hint of a smile tugging at her lips, but it faded as quickly as it came. Her gaze moved to the sketchbook I held, then back to my face. "Do you know what they'd say?" she began, her voice lower now. "If they saw how often we're here alone, like this?" I set my sketchbook down, sensing where her words were heading. "They'd probably say it's not allowed," I murmured. Her eyes softened, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. "It isn't," she said. "This, whatever it is we keep circling around, it's against the rules. I'm supposed to keep a distance. You're supposed to just be a student. That's how it's written." The words hung between us, heavier than any lecture. For the first time, the invisible line was not only felt but spoken, drawn into the open like a line of charcoal across a blank page. "I know," I said quietly. "But when has art ever followed rules?" Her breath caught for a second, just a flicker in the stillness. "This isn't about art," she whispered. "It's about people. About what happens if someone misunderstands, or if we both get hurt." I stepped a little closer, careful not to close the distance too much, but enough that I could see the hesitation in her eyes, how they flicked toward the window, then back to me, as if searching for a safer place to land. "You're afraid of what it might mean," I said. "But you're here, too." Her fingers released the desk, brushing against the air between us as if testing it. For a heartbeat, the storm outside filled the silence, rain tapping its own rhythm against the glass. "I am," she admitted finally. "But that doesn't mean I stop caring about the rules." I held her gaze then, steady, warm. "Then let's break them together." She didn't answer, not with words. But the way her shoulders eased, the way her eyes softened even as she turned away, told me the line had already begun to blur. The rain had stopped by the time we stepped outside, leaving the campus wrapped in the cool hush that follows a storm. The pavement glistened under the dim glow of the street lamps, each puddle holding a trembling reflection of the city lights beyond the gates. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and fading blossoms from the garden hedges that lined the walkway. "I didn't think you'd actually come out for a walk," I said, glancing at her beside me. Ms. Hale's scarf was pulled closer around her neck, her coat buttoned loosely. Her hair, freed from its usual neat twist, fell against her shoulders, darkened slightly by the mist. "Neither did I," she admitted, her voice softer than usual, as though she, too, wasn't certain how this had happened. "But the studio was starting to feel too small tonight." We walked slowly, not because the path was long, but because either of us seemed in a hurry to reach its end. The campus garden stretched ahead, rows of benches slick with rain, the faint rustle of wet leaves in the breeze. "Do you ever get tired of the quiet?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But it's easier than the noise of being misunderstood." Her words lingered, the kind that carried more history than they revealed. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I sensed it wasn't something you pulled at too hard. So I let the silence stretch, comfortable in its own way. A soft laugh escaped her as a stray drop from a tree branch landed on her shoulder. "See? Even the garden's against me tonight," she said, brushing it off. I smiled, watching the way her sleeve brushed my arm as she moved. It wasn't a deliberate touch, but it stayed with me, how close she was, how natural it felt for our steps to fall in rhythm. "You're easy to talk to," I said quietly, almost surprising myself with the honesty of it. She glanced sideways, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "That's dangerous for both of us." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's the first honest thing in a while." We paused near a bench beneath a canopy of dripping branches. The city lights blinked faintly through the trees, casting shifting shadows on the wet ground. She rested one hand on the back of the bench, fingers tracing the cold metal rail as if considering something. "You know this doesn't just affect me," she said. "You're at the start of something, your name, your future. People will talk." I met her gaze steady. "And what about what we want? Don't we get to talk, too?" The wind tugged gently at her scarf. For a moment, her hand stayed on the bench, close enough that my fingers nearly touched hers. Neither of us pulled away. Not yet. The night didn't ask for promises, only presence. And in that quiet, damp stretch of garden, we both gave it. The art exhibit was alive with sound, soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers, the polite murmur of guests weaving between paintings, the occasional clink of glasses from the refreshment table. But for all the noise around me, my attention kept pulling toward her. Ms. Hale stood a few feet away, speaking with one of the gallery curators, her hands folded in front of her, her expression calm but slightly distant. She wore a dark, understated dress that brushed just above her knees, a faint shimmer at her neckline catching the low amber lights. She looked completely at ease, the kind of presence that drew notice without ever asking for it. I lingered by a corner display, watching people flow past. It felt strange seeing her here, not as a teacher but as part of the art world itself, a space where she belonged and I still felt like a guest. When her conversation ended, she spotted me and made her way over, the crowd thinning as the evening wound down. "You didn't have to come," she said softly, her voice carrying beneath the hum of the room. "I wanted to," I replied. "Your name was on the curator's list. I figured that meant something." A faint smile tugged at her lips. "It means I've been here longer than most. That's all." We stood side by side, watching a large oil piece across the room. For a moment neither of us spoke. The crowd was still there, but it felt like it had shifted just a little to give us this quiet corner. "You've been distant lately," I said quietly. Her shoulders rose and fell in a subtle sigh. "I had to be. I kept telling myself that was the right thing. And now?" She turned to me then, fully, her eyes searching mine, not with the sharpness of a critic, but with something far more fragile. "No," she whispered. "I find myself here, with you, and I don't know how to explain that anymore." The words weren't loud, but they landed like a ripple in still water. Around us, the gallery lights gleamed off polished floors, the conversations moved on, and yet the space between us felt suspended, somewhere separate, somewhere unmarked. I reached up slowly, brushing a loose curl of hair from her cheek. It was a small gesture, hesitant at first, but I felt her breath catch. "This is still wrong," she said, her voice trembling just enough to betray how hard she had tried not to feel it. "Wrong doesn't always mean untrue," I murmured. Her eyes softened, and for the briefest moment, the mask she wore for everyone else slipped. I saw the woman who stayed late grading papers because her apartment was too quiet, the woman who kept her heart folded away because it was safer there. "We can't keep pretending this isn't there," I added. She exhaled slowly, a sound more like surrender than agreement. "I've thought about you too," she admitted. It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't even a promise. But in that quiet corridor, away from the crowd, it was enough. The semester had ended quietly, with more rain than sun, and the studio now felt like a hollow echo of what it once was. Empty easels stood in rows, brushes left to dry in jars along the back wall. The golden hour poured through the tall windows, soft and forgiving, tinting the air with a warm glow that made everything look a little less certain, like a memory trying to stay. I had come to pick up my final portfolio, expecting nothing more than the silence of an ending. But when the door opened behind me, I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Ms. Hale stepped in, her heels muted against the wood floor, her hair loose this time, catching the fading light like dark silk. She didn't carry papers, or a folder, or any of the things that usually placed her on one side of the line and me on the other. She just came. "You're still here," she said, with that small curve of a smile I had grown to know. "I thought I'd get a last look at the place," I answered. "It feels strange, leaving it behind." She moved closer, her hand brushing against one of the empty stools as she passed. "It does that," she murmured. "It holds pieces of you, even when you think you've walked away." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence wasn't heavy now, it was patient. The kind that waits for you to find the right words. "I've been thinking," I began, turning to face her fully, "about everything we said, and everything we didn't." Her eyes met mine, steady, no more running in them. "So have I." The afternoon light framed her face, softening every line, every guarded edge. She stepped closer, not in a rush, but with the certainty of someone who had decided that some risks are worth their weight. "I can't keep pretending this is just a passing thing," I said. "And I don't want it to be something secret, or something we hide until it breaks us." She exhaled slowly, a sound almost like relief. "Neither do I," she whispered. "I was afraid of what people might say, of what it might cost. But then I realized the only thing heavier than the risk was the emptiness I'd feel if I kept turning away." She reached out then, her hand finding its way over my heart. The pressure was light, barely there, but it felt like it belonged. My fingers rose instinctively, wrapping around hers, holding them there. "We don't have to rush," she said, her voice steady now. "But we can be honest. With ourselves. With each other." I nodded. That's all I wanted. The studio smelled faintly of turpentine and fading rain, and somewhere outside, a bird started singing as the day turned toward evening. We stood there, forehead to forehead, no need for promises, just a quiet, shared beginning.